are going to begin our last session, but I do want to remind everybody that after this session, we have a reception. And there will be lovely food, wine, beer, water, anything. But please, that's really our time to begin relaxing a little bit, because this has been a big day. So we're very thrilled to have another new leader here at USIP. Kristen Lord just began as Executive Vice President, and she brings a lot of really exciting background, and again, somebody who has stepped between the policy world, academia, and practice. She is the former Executive Vice President for the Center for New American Security, and prior to that, she was also an Assistant Dean at the George Washington University. Her full bio is in your packet, so without further delay, I'm going to ask Kristen to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks very much, Kathleen, and thanks to all of you for being here. It sounds like you've had a terrific conference so far. But my job is to welcome Jody Williams. It is a great honor, and I do so on behalf of the United States Institute of Peace, to introduce one of the most well-known women peacemakers in the world, Nobel Laureate Jody Williams. Jody Williams received the Nobel Prize in 1997 for her work through the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, which also shared the prize with her that year. And at that time, she became the 10th woman and only the 3rd American woman to receive the Peace Prize in its almost 100-year history. In 2006, she took the lead in establishing the Nobel Women's Initiative and has since served as its chair. The initiative brings together the living female peace laureates to support women around the world who are working for peace, justice, and equality. In May 2011, the Nobel Women's Initiative convened a groundbreaking conference, Women Forging a New Security, Ending Sexual Violence and War. And this conference sought to devise new strategies to end rape in wartime. It also laid the foundation for an international campaign. Currently, Jody holds the Sam and Seal Keeper Endowed Professorship in Peace and Social Justice at the University of Houston. She also seems to commute to Chicago, where she holds the inaugural Jane Addams Distinguished Visiting Fellow in Social Justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She has a new memoir coming out. It's called My Name is Jody Williams, A Vermont Girl's Winding Path to the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's going to be published by the University of California next month. You can all go and pre-order it on Amazon, and I checked that before I came down, so make a note. And Jody, we're just really honored to have you here, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The introductions always freak me out, to be honest. I'm obviously conversing with you. I am not lecturing. I don't have anything prepared. We'll see what comes out. I'm never sure, to be honest. And being introduced like that, as I noted, freaks me out because I'm a grassroots activist. My first protest was against the war in Vietnam. Then I worked for 11 years trying to stop U.S. military intervention in Nicaragua and El Salvador. Then I was asked to help create an international campaign to ban landmines, and we were successful. And now I chair the Nobel Women's Initiative, and there are 6 of us, as you noted, who are part of it. I will tell you who they are. And when I grimace, it's not because I'm looking at you and thinking, why the hell am I sitting here when I could be home with my dog? I have a spinal issue going on, so I will be moving and grimacing. The oldest in terms of seniority would be Mairead Maguire, 1976, from Northern Ireland. I think after that is Rigoberta Menchú, 90 or 91, I'm not quite sure, from Guatemala. I think I come next, Jody Williams from the US. Then we we did have Wangari Maathai, 2004, who died of cancer over a year ago. Also, Dr. Shirin Ebadi, first Muslim woman to receive the Peace Prize, 2003. Now, Lema Gabowi from Liberia and Tawakkol Karman are part of the campaign. They received the Peace Prize in 2011. Neither President Sirleaf nor Aung San Suu Kyi have been invited to join the Nobel Women's Initiative because sitting heads of state, elected officials, high government appointed officials cannot be part of the initiative because sometimes government policies do not exactly run parallel to what we are saying in the initiative, and we thought it could make everybody uncomfortable. I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about the continuum of violence because it says I'm doing that. I don't know if it says, at least it says it in the agenda. But I'm really going to talk about civil society's role in tackling this problem because I kept looking through the agenda and I saw panel 1 was the international response and panel 2 was the national response. And then it went on to perpetrators and victims and I thought, what the hell happened to civil society? I wondered because we keep hearing both in panel 1 and panel 2 that the role of civil society is critical, and yet somehow we manage to get overlooked a lot. And I find that irritating, to say the least, especially since most of my career, or much of my career, if you can call being a grassroots activist a career, has been trying to bring independent NGOs, non-governmental organizations together in campaigns to create overarching strategies to press governments to do what we believe they should be doing anyway. So to have that element not here, except kind of in lip service, I thought I could fill the gap. So I'll talk about the campaign. And some of the advisory committee members are here. Human Rights Watch, Physicians for Human Rights, Pro Mundo, Sonke Gender Justice. So if I leave stuff out, or if I say something that you think I got a little wrong, please just, stand up and shout out. The continuum of violence, we heard bits and pieces about that today. I kept noting when people would make reference to it. And it made me start thinking about the first time that I remember thinking about a continuum of violence. And it was about 15 years ago, I was part of a symposium at Barnard up at Columbia University. And one of the themes in that symposium was the continuum of violence. And since then, especially in the context of this campaign that we and many others are part of now, the International Campaign to Stop Rape and Gender Violence in Conflict, I think a lot about the continuum of violence. Because I think it's too easy to look at rape in conflict and think about the other. It happens over there. It's not something that really affects us, whoever us is. And I don't think that's a very holistic, helpful way to look at the situation. And many people have already said that today, that rape in conflict, and I'll talk about why we chose the term conflict, too, for the campaign to stop rape and gender violence in conflict. It doesn't spring out of the ether. Rape in conflict doesn't just happen. It is a result, as we all know, of structural, individual, military violence that I believe pervade most societies. And being a citizen of the United States, I would particularly note my own country. I think about, and I think anybody from different countries, when they think about the foundation of their nation state, can look at both the positives and the negatives. And most states choose to focus on the positive. Understandable. I mean, who's going to point out their flaws, right? But I think about the foundation of this country on, some today would call it genocide. followed by slavery, resulting in institutionalized sexism, racism, violence against anybody who isn't of the elite in a way, in a structural way. We live in an economic system that is increasingly haves and have-nots, as we all know. That is a structural violence against people in this country, and not just this country. It's accepted as that's the way it is. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. What's wrong with you? Instead of recognizing that the structures and the institutions reinforce that, and that people don't, have an equal opportunity like we want to believe from the American mythology. So we look at that kind of violence. I cannot not think about the violence of war. And as a US citizen, again, I have to, and this is not an issue, and I have to always remember to say this, this is not about the soldiers themselves, this is not about the military. I'm not a total pacifist. I believe there is a need for military. I'm talking about policymakers. I'm talking about generally the men that sit in Washington and make decisions about war based on policy, based on resources, based on all the things that we know that happen that lead a country to go to war. One of the, I think, big violences in my country is the contradiction that I still cannot really understand here, that Americans believe this is a peaceful country. I was at another conference somewhere and was talking with people about that. And I don't know, one of the questions they asked made me go Google. We all love Google. I Googled to see how many, I love Google. You don't have to, anyway, I won't go off on Google. I could do that too. But I Googled how many US military interventions there had been since the beginning of this country. In the beginning, meaning from, when Columbus landed and the wars against the indigenous people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a professor at Evergreen State University in Washington. And you can Google it. The list is there. And if I'm remembering the statistic perfectly, which I may not be, but I'm not too wrong, there is something like only 4 years in the entire history of the United States, not contiguous, by the way, in which this country wasn't involved in some way in military action, CIA action, overt war, covert war, et cetera, et cetera. Go check it out yourselves. If I'm wrong, if I forget, please send me an email. I answer all of my own email. Jody Williams at nobelwomensinitiative.org. So that kind of violence in this culture, and many others, but not to the degree of this one, is something we do not address. It is something that I believe helps shape violence against women, making it be acceptable. I also think about the violence, not just of deciding to go to war, but the violence of the arms trade, of the weapons industry, of countries that more or less are at peace. And I say more or less because you go into the inner cities of the United States and many would contend they are not at peace. I just come from Chicago, where a young woman who participated in Obama's second inauguration was shot and killed by gang people shooting at others. Those families do not believe they live in a situation of peace. But I think about the West, the big five arms dealers, France, the UK, the US, Sweden. I'm not so sure where Sweden stands in there. I don't know that Norway's all that great, but I'm not positive. I love Norway. But, countries that live off, in many ways, selling weapons of war to countries supposedly in the name of alliance, in the name of defense, when we damn well know that many of the weapons that are being sent into those regions of the world that are in horrific conflict are being used to perpetrate more violence. Those are the kinds of overarching continuums of violence that I think about. And then when I think about the continuum of violence against women, it's many of the things, again, that we were hearing this morning, from domestic violence to bride burning to honor killing to FGM, thank you, sorry, I have a hard time with the acronyms, to FGM, to what we were hearing about from the woman who spoke about Afghanistan, bargaining off a woman to resolve a dispute. That happens everywhere. Not all of those things, but violence against women in many forms happen everywhere. And so when we think about stopping violence in conflict, again, it's making it the other, but that wouldn't happen if there wasn't a generalized acceptance in some ways of violence against women. I believe that to make that change, we have to look at the entire continuum. It doesn't mean that you may not pick out going after sexualized violence in conflict as a tool to address larger issues of violence, but it does mean that if you're going to address it properly, in my view, you have to put it in the continuum of violence. And I was thinking this morning, before I heard somebody say it, so I was glad that it wasn't my own fantasizing, when talking about impunity, it occurred to me that, of course, impunity, because the whole system is male. And again, when we talk about the male structures of power, that doesn't mean and I'm using myself, I'll say me, I don't hate all men. Discussing factual situations does not mean that you necessarily dislike the people in power in those situations. But to pretend that that isn't the situation disempowers yourself and those who believe it should be changed from dealing with it properly. This power structure in the world since forever is male. And as one of the speakers earlier, I think in the second panel, was talking about, men protect each other. They're not going to prosecute men, ergo, impunity reigns. If I were a man, maybe I would think that was cool. I'd probably support it. It isn't, though. So part of the reason that we have come together in the International Campaign to Stop Rape and Gender Violence in Conflict is to add our thinking, our action, our voice to trying to deal with this problem, this global public health epidemic, this scourge, all of the words that we can use to describe this. And we have 3 Ps, which we also heard this morning: protection, prevention, and prosecution. And it's not that one does only one thing. Some gentleman who spoke said that, we can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. We can deal with, the issue of impunity while we're trying to deal with protection, while we're trying to deal with prevention, while we're trying to help women empower themselves. It's not like going and telling women who have been violated in any country in the world what they need. They know what they need. It's helping them have the platform and the ability to stand up and ask for what they need. And that's one of the things that we in the Nobel Women's Initiative have been able to do, is provide a platform. It's the whole reason we came together as the Nobel Women's Initiative, recognizing that we have some influence and access by virtue of the Peace Prize. And wouldn't it be cool if we could share that with women's organizations around the world working for sustainable peace with justice and equality? When we convene something, people tend to show up, not always. We've been egged before, and we'll be egged again, I'm sure. But when we convene, people tend to come, and normally we convene and sit back and let the women, we're still mostly dealing with women, let the women themselves speak about their own situation. We're not there to tell their story. We're there to hopefully bring media and others to listen to their story, to work with them to find ways to resolve their own problems, provide resources, provide training if that's something they say they want. And that was the genesis of the Nobel Women's Initiative. And then as we kept looking at gender-based violence or rape in war, whatever you want to call it, we felt that we really had to do something as organized civil society to respond to that issue, that problem. Calling it a problem seems a little ridiculous. It's not a problem. It's a horror. The idea kind of emerged from some of us who were involved in the creation of the international campaign to ban landmines, who had experience in bringing organizations together in a coalition, strategizing together in that coalition about actions that we could take or not take. Some aren't appropriate to every organization in a campaign. But strategizing together, having goals, objectives, ways to move forward together, and by so doing, you strengthen everybody. Right? There are tremendous organizations doing awesome work in every country that is facing this. However, if you have an organization here and an organization there and an organization there, it's much easier to ignore their voice. It's easier to isolate. It's easier to make them feel like nobody cares and nobody's listening. But if you bring different organizations together representing different aspects of the problem or the solution to the problem, you immediately, just by virtue of contact, communication, being able to all say you are part of a global effort to deal with this, you begin the process of empowerment. And we purposely bring together organizations with a variety or different expertise so that it's not just like a judicial response, or it's not a response to deal with survivors, or just a response, and I don't mean just, I don't know what other word, but just a response on prevention, protect. It's various actors, players coming together to lend their knowledge, their experience, their expertise to this global effort, which is growing and growing, I'm happy to say, to deal with this issue from the grassroots perspective, from the perspective of people pushing to make governments do what they should do anyway, in my view. I mean, I appreciated when Meland Revere said this morning that all of the initiatives looked fabulous on paper. Right, the U.S. 1325 National Plan and laws that the U.S. has passed, the words are beautiful. However, if those words are not translated into consistent, concrete action, they are completely irrelevant. They're useless. It's almost as if they were created as just a mental exercise to make a few people feel good. The purpose of national plans of action, the purpose of legislation, the purpose of special courts, the purpose of special prosecutors is to actually deal with the problem. And I believe that that is the primary role of civil society, is staying, sometimes it's adversarial. We can't pretend that we're always happy partners in the process. Sometimes we are in serious naming and shaming. And I know there's some people here who don't think it works. From my experience in a landmine campaign, it works. When we would write our reports saying this country, this country, this country continues to use landmines, they would freak out and come running up to us and complain. And our response was, if you want your name off that list, we will help you. We will work with you so that you can stop using landmines or implement your national mine clearance plan or whatever aspect they were being shamed on. But it worked. Nobody likes to be singled out. Governments, in particular, when they're all sitting together, do not want to be singled out. I mean, that's part of the diplomatic ballet, right? We all use pretty language and your excellency and your esteemed this and your wonderful that. And then we're there going, huh, no, you ain't that wonderful in this regard. You messed this up, you didn't do this, you said you were going to do that, you didn't do it. But coming out of that process, we also built incredibly strong partnerships with governments that shared our goal. And Norway is not just because you're there, not just because we got the Peace Prize from you all, but Norway has consistently been one of the governments in the lead that you can count on to be a partner. Canada was, during the days of the landmine campaign, they've kind of gone off track a little bit with their current government. So true. South Africa has been good on most issues. I mean, I could name, but it came about by virtue of us working with them, harassing them, being true to what we said we were going to do. I had a U.S. general say to me at one point when we were on the verge of achieving the mine ban treaty, he and I had sparred quite a bit, and he came up to me and he said, you know something, I don't agree with you, but I respect you and the campaign and how you have gone about your work. Because if we said we were going to do this, we did it. If we said we weren't going to do that, we did it. And it was through that long process that we were able to build partnerships. And the reality is that we couldn't negotiate a mine ban treaty. You know, we had to have government partners. And sometimes I think that governments get a little agitated and think that when organized civil society wants to have a role in determining its own future, that we suddenly want to be a government. I can swear on a stack of my mother's Bibles that I have never had any intention of working in a government, for a government, or as an elected official. I believe that responsible citizenship, global citizenship, is not just talking about our human rights, which we should talk about, but it's also our responsibility to participate in creating the change that we want to see. And that happens, at least in my experience, and I'm happy to hear others, from organization, strategy, action. A lot of young people, when I speak, come up and they tell me they're agitated about global warming or they're agitated about X or Y or Z. And my first question to them is, so what are you doing about it? I'm happy to say that many can actually answer me, and they can tell me what organization they're volunteering with. And then we have the others who just say, I just don't know what to do. And my response to them is, worrying is not a strategy for change. It's not going to get you anywhere. It's going to give you a headache. Just, get rid of it. Have a beer, watch football, or whatever it is you like to do. Hula hoop, I don't care what it is, but if you're not going to take the concern you express and turn it into concrete action to address the issue that's making you agitated, it's a waste. On the other hand, any young person, even people my own age, I'm 62, anybody who can come to me and talk about the actions they're taking for change, I'm fully embracing. And I do converse by email constantly. And that is part of my belief and the belief of those of us who have come together to create the International Campaign to Stop Rape and Gender Violence and Conflict, which is too long a name, that we have to communicate. We have to share the information. We have to share the power. One of the great things that we did in the landmine campaign, and I think we're replicating in this one, is all of the members of the campaign know what is happening in the campaign. One could decide to keep the majority of the information to oneself and parcel it out. And then, all you're doing is making yourself supposedly important and disempowering everybody else who shares the same goal that you do. I think we have a long way to go in the campaign, just like governments do, just like the UN does. We would invite any organization, non-governmental in nature, who wishes to join and isn't already. Please join. I have little cards that I can pass out. We do engage in conversation with military. Charlotte is one of my favorite military from Sweden, who is now at NATO doing gender training. Thank you. I wish we could send you everywhere in the world. And we do partner with governments. We do a lot with UN Women. Mrs. Bangura and I have been on platforms together already quite a lot, and I imagine over the next years we will be together a lot. And that's part, and I mean that in a good way. I think she's awesome. That's part of the process of making it change. I said that I wanted to comment about conflict, why we chose the Campaign to Stop Rape and Gender Violence in conflict. We had a long discussion about it in our advisory group, and it's some 24 or 25 organizations from all over the world. Whether it should be armed conflict, whether it should be war. Some of us liked war because there's too much, there's not enough conversation about war anymore. Somebody this morning was talking about, there were 2 women who mentioned WILPF. And by the way, the first 2 women who received the Nobel Peace Prize, each were founders of WILPF, which I think is very hard to say. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So some of us actually wanted to say war so we could get back to talking about war. It's not conflict, it's war. People killing each other, it's war. On the other hand, we recognize the continuum of violence. That it isn't, I already said it, so I won't say it again. That we wanted to be able to make this as broad as we can over time. We recognized if we started with every single act of violence against women at the same time, we would not be very successful. That we wanted to at least start with the very obvious, rape and gender violence in conflict and broaden it as the campaign got bigger, as many of us hope in this campaign that we will help spur a larger conversation about not only violence against women, but the violence of war. And that talking about demilitarization and disarmament is not a dirty phrase. It's not nuts to talk about deciding to spend much of your budget on the needs of the society rather than keeping people who build the weapons in business. That's not irrational. And I thought in passing earlier this morning about Article 26 of the UN Charter. Does anybody here know what it is? I only know because people made me know. I didn't know before. And I may have the wrong one, but I'm pretty sure it's Article 26, which required members of the Security Council working with a military advisory group that they did have at the initiation of the UN to immediately begin making a plan for diverting resources from war to meeting the needs of society, right? In theory, the entire reason for the United Nations to be created was to preserve the peace. Right? So in that context, Article 26 called for nations to start looking at ways to take money away from war and put it to those things that actually make a society strong and secure. Education, housing, access to health care, those odd little things that get like 1% of our budget here in the US, while 50% goes to the military of the discretionary funds. That has never been done. I think that perhaps at some point our campaign itself should call a conference to create a plan to fulfill Article 26 and suggest that governments could use that. If they started doing that and put some of it to stopping rape and gender violence in conflict, I think we would see a different world. I think I've yapped long enough. I want to leave time for, one other thing. I was thinking about development, and with development comes, the implication I got, and I could be wrong, but with development comes sophistication. With sophistication comes good military that, don't perpetrate evils. And then I thought about an organization in the United States, SWAN. The name of, I only know the acronym. Do you know, Liesl, do you know? Service Women Action Network, former active duty military women who came together to finally openly press for recognition that rape, harassment, gender violence in the military is, in their view, epidemic. It affects men as well as women. And because of their work, because of their lobbying, they have actually been able to get some legislation passed to deal with that. So when I think about, the good guys, a term I despise, the good guys and the bad guys. We're now good guys and bad guys all over the world. And we know who the good guys are, right? But the good guys who have, horrific sexual issues internally in their military are then talking to others about, what's wrong with their military? Let's not presume that just because somebody is supposedly sophisticated that they are free of violence against women, gender violence, sexual violence. I think the best way to be able to deal with this is to go home at night, take off your uniform, and I don't just mean yours, sir, in the military. I mean the uniform of an activist or the uniform of a diplomat or the uniform of whatever. Look in the mirror and start thinking about violence. Think about it, really. Think about it in terms of the real impact of violence. I'm so sick of the words of collateral damage. It's not collateral damage, it's dead people. It has blown up buildings. It has ruined infrastructure of a city, a town, a country. Let's stop saying collateral damage. Let's stop saying bad guy and good guy. Implication being United States, NATO good, too many others bad. It's bullshit. There are good and bad everywhere. And until we look at that, we disempower ourselves and our nation. Finally, I keep saying I'm going to shut up and then I get a new idea. I'm sorry. One area in which we are very weak in this campaign still is involving men who share our perspective, men who want to shift the way manhood is defined. To my knowledge, we only have one organization of that nature in the campaign, and it's Sonke Gender Justice from South Africa. We need more men. So if you have any thoughts about men's organizations who would like to participate in this, and I do think we have to start shifting the stigma. Somebody talked about, why do we want to shift the stigma and shame from the woman to the man? I think the reality is a perpetrator is committing a crime. They need to be called out. Why is it that the victim for millennia has always been the seducer, the whore, the slut? I think some of you have seen or participated in some of the slut walks around the world in response to women being called slutty because they have been raped. The person we should be looking at is the perpetrator of the violence, not the person who is violated. I will end, this time I really will. Mrs. Bangura alluded to my own situation of sexual assault. I worked in Salvador, as I said, for quite a few years, and I was sexually assaulted by a member of the Salvadoran Death Squad. It was the death squad run by Roberto Daubuisson, who was a great student of the School of the Americas here in the United States. I never considered myself to be a victim. It was a political act to try to make me leave the country and stop working for the people and for their self-determination. I just thought he was a scumbag, period. And with that, let's have some conversation. How many more minutes do we have? No clapping allowed. Please don't clap. We talked too long. We only have 5 minutes. The lady in blue. Hi. But if you stick around for the reception, I'm happy to continue chatting.
Thank you for your talk. I'm Carrie Crawford from George Washington University. Having successfully led the campaign to ban landmines, what do you see as the major obstacles facing this campaign to stop rape and gender violence and conflict? Easy question.
I think we kind of outlined them already, you know. It's the structural violence. It's women as in, you know, I heard somebody call them second-class citizens. I think that's in a good country. You know, in some countries, we don't even get above, you know, dog. That's obviously a huge problem. And, you know, the words feminism and sexism aren't popular, but the reality of male-dominated structures globally, it doesn't matter what the structure is, men dominate it. As long as that is the case, it is very difficult to shift the conversation. And it's not that women are perfect and wonderful. I myself have been accused of many very nasty things, and I embrace many of them. The difference is that, okay, there have been several studies done about women in management of corporations, showing that until you have 30% women on, you know, the board, we'll take that as an example, the conversation will not shift. Women will be intimidated, men will dominate the conversation, but as soon as you have 30 and above, you begin to hear other voices. And there have been other studies that have indicated that when you have diversity of voice, which often, not always, can indicate diversity of thought, you can come up with really better answers than if it's, you know, a bunch of dudes in a room making a decision without anybody else around, as is the case in negotiations for peace. And we still keep getting lip service about we need women there. Why aren't they there? At this point in time, why are not women there? I know I'm diverting again. I can't help myself. Recently, I was in Hiroshima with Shirin Ebadi and a bunch of women, and there was a guy from the UN who was in a position of leadership. And we were conversing after his presentation. I think it was something about, you know, raising up gender. And so I asked him, you know, how they were doing in the UN about their self-imposed goal of making 10% of positions of management be women. 10%. We're more than 50% of the world, but 10%. And he didn't even sheepishly say it. He said, oh, no, we're not even beyond 1 or 2%. And I said, well, why? And this he says to a delegation of women. Because there are no qualified candidates. And he was not joking. He was not joking. There are no qualified candidates. Why? Because it's all men thinking about the men they know, nominating the men they know. It will never change as long as that structure continues. So those are the things that are the underlying root of the problem. Sexism. And it's not that we want to be men. I'm going to repeat it. We want equality. We don't want to have to ask for it. It should just be. There was a hand over here. So, I don't care. Sir?
I am Farid from State University of New York, but I come from Indonesia. I work in Aceh, Indonesia.
Indonesia.
Yeah, if I'm not mistakenly, your word in the beginning about how the Nobel Women Initiative doesn't include Aung San Suu Kyi there. I think that's kind of interesting, you know. Aung San Suu Kyi is a woman, but she holds the power position, and with that reason, you doesn't include her in the Nobel Initiative. And also, I think that's I need more your comment about that. And then also about I called the manipulation of women's political participation. I think there's a lot in post-conflict area, like for example in Aceh where I work, the post-conflict government under the issue of gender equality like to invite a lot of women in the process of policy making, but it is only for the manipulation.
Right.
Like they put in the absence list, but doesn't really work in the implementation and the creation of the policy itself.
I agree.
Thank you.
He was talking about some governments and political parties that put women on candidate lists just to look good, but it isn't because they really want a strong woman with their own opinion to participate. Often, if they are elected, they're a mouthpiece for the men of the political party. I think with that, should we end? I'm sorry that I took up so much of my own time. It's really rather converse, but once I get on a roll. Thank you for listening, and please don't clap. Please, stop. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Please join us now for reception in the Great Hall, time to relax, and we look forward to seeing you there.